You're listening to Sound Money from Casey Research.
Hello and welcome to the show with me, Andy Duncan, in London. Today my special guest is Catherine Austin Fitz in Tennessee, who publishes the Solari Report. She's also the president of Solari Incorporated. On the show today, we'll be discussing debt ceilings, a mysterious $4 trillion which went missing in action, gold investment, Obamacare, the ongoing mystery of Janet Yellen, and what on earth the Popsicle Index is and why it might be important. Hello, Catherine.
It's great to be on with you, Andy. How's London?
It's wet and it's damp and it's cold, so it's typical English weather. Now, it's been really great speaking with you again after we met in Arizona. Recently, the whole US Congress approved a law to suspend the government's debt ceiling limit until, I believe, March 2015. Do you think this is just the Republican Party sacrificing principle for political advantage again, or is it a good thing for America?
Well, I don't think this is, in the scheme of things, a big issue. The big issue will be how they implement changes, fundamental changes in the expenditure items. So the debt limit, traditionally, if you look at the process by which Congress approved the issuance of more and more debt, what we've had is relatively short authorizations while Congress kept spending. And in fact, the debt limit has become a political barrier by which everybody sort of engineers more pork and has more fights. And America's sick of the process. So the real work has to be done on the expenditure side. So I don't see this making a big difference one way or the other. I do think, Andy, that it's a clear message from higher up saying, look, we cannot afford, America is, and the world is sick of the sort of childishness of the process. So get your act together and keep your squabbles behind closed doors.
And what effects do you think this debt ceiling suspension is going to have on investors? Do you think it's going to be good or bad for them?
I think it's probably going to be good for them in the sense that you're going to have a lot less partisan mess, obviously, in the, sort of in the visible. I don't think it's going to make a big difference one way or another as to how much debt is outstanding and how that debt is managed. So I think this is on one hand, it's a tempest on the teapot. It's the fundamentals in the long run that's going to drive what's good or bad for investors. So I don't think this makes a big difference on the fundamentals.
Do you think we'll ever see a point where they stop raising this debt limit? And if they're just going to keep raising it and raising it every couple of years, why don't they just get rid of it completely?
Well, I think the question is, the problem with the federal credit mechanism is you have no internal financial controls whatsoever. So you have a system, if you and I have a company or if you and I are running a municipal government, whether it's in the UK or here, we have to balance the budget. But as a practical matter and as a political matter, there's nothing that forces the Congress to balance the budget or the mechanism to have financial integrity. And I think if you let go of the debt limit entirely, you're basically confessing that to the world. And that is also politically very challenging to do.
Now, one of the big spending programs at the moment is Obamacare. Now, whether it's good or bad, it's being steamrolled through America at the moment, despite lots of opposition along the way. Now, the tendency for policies like this kind of socialized healthcare, like the national health here in the UK, is that once they do get embedded, it generally is impossible to get rid of them again. Do you think Obamacare is going to be detrimental to America, or are people just going to get used to it and just soak it up just like all the other welfare programs?
Well, let's look at Obamacare, because I don't see Obamacare as something designed to offer health care. I think Obamacare was created to create a framework. We had health care costs exploding, and it was designed to create a framework that will allow three things. One is for you to use digital technology to radically reduce labor costs down. So don't be surprised if you see labor costs over the next 3 years drop $500 billion to $1 trillion from what they could have been, just through the application of digital systems and a variety of different automation and technology. So that's number one. The second thing is you wanted, as the baby boomers were aging, to cut off the growth and make it possible to basically dramatically reduce the healthcare services available to them in a way that would protect corporate profits. And the third thing you wanted to do was to use healthcare basically to really control the population. And I think they've managed to do all of that. They've managed to dramatically sort of stem total expense liabilities, whether it's governmental or corporate, and do it in a way that guaranteed corporations and gave politicians more control. So I see this as being much more an effort to centralize power as opposed to socialize healthcare. Healthcare was pretty government controlled in the first place. So I view it as fundamentally different. I think the question comes down to, a bigger one, which is, are we going to create a society where 100% of everything is digitized and under central control? And so what happens to Obamacare is part of that much bigger issue. If you look deeply into GMO or into digital currency, it's the same issue. Are we going to digitize everything and put it under central control?
And do you think this central control can be rolled back, or are we stuck with it?
Well, here's the question that I keep asking, and I don't have the answer. And if you come and look at a lot of what we do on the Solari report, we're trying to push the envelope in terms of understanding, because I don't think you can come up with real solutions or real predictions unless you can define what's really happening and why. And I come back to the question I always come back to when you and I talk about currency, which is, who's the governance system and why are they behaving the way they're behaving? What we see is, we see a literally a psychopathic effort and intensity, whether it's in the energy area, whether it's in the currency area, whether it's in the food area, whether it's in the healthcare area, to get 100% central control and to use digital means to do it. And the question is why? Who's really running things and why do they want this kind of central control? Because we're basically looking at a process which is, to me, it's insane. Now, I don't think the people that I've at least been associated with who are running things are insane. I mean, I've found them to be very intelligent, very capable people. So the question is, why are they doing this? Are they doing it because the technology allows them to do it? Are they doing it because they're afraid of risks? What are those risks? Once you go to the question of mapping out the governance system, you get lost down a rabbit hole of all sorts of questions, and a lot more questions than answers. But I think this comes down to, what's the governance system and how does the financial system fit into it, and why are people doing what they're doing? And I, for one, don't have the answer to those questions. I just have a lot of questions.
Now, there's this great cartoon currently on your Solari website about this kind of loss of control and the loss of $4 trillion from various government departments. What do you think should be done to try to find this money and try to get some control over what's going on?
Well, you have a complete breakdown of internal financial controls in the U.S. government, Andy. I was part of a group of people in the Bush administration, for example, who got laws passed that required what's called the 21 covered agencies to produce audited financial statements. The process began in 1995, whereby those agencies came back and reported that they couldn't produce audited financial statements. But what they did start to report was extraordinary discrepancies between, for example, the amount of securities they said they were issuing on their balance sheet versus the amount of securities in the markets. Or, for example, the amount of mortgages shown in the federal credit mortgage pools versus, the amount of houses versus the amount of mortgages out in the market. And so they also started to report enormous amounts of money going missing. So at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, at DOD, and then at NASA, by 2002, you had over $4 trillion of what's called undocumentable adjustments. And so, and a refusal to this day, they have never, as required by law, produced audited financial statements. Now, if your company refused to do that, the SEC would shut you down. They wouldn't let your stock trade, or the market would shut you down. Or if you were a municipal government, there'd be all sorts of, problems to pay. in the federal government just keeps borrowing and doesn't comply with the law. And Congress, and this gets back to the debt limit issue, Congress, in the Constitution, it says that you cannot appropriate and spend money except as authorized in an appropriation bill. There are some there are some legal exceptions to that, but we've basically seen Congress appropriate more money every year, despite the fact, that you have literally trillions of dollars unreported, unaccounted for. It's so in violation of the Constitution, it's kind of gotten out of control. And to give you a sense of how bad it is, in the summer of 2000, I went to visit with the chief of staff to the senator who was in charge of the Appropriations Subcommittee for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it was a person I didn't know very well. They said, "What do you think is going on at HUD?" And I said, I don't know. What do you think is going on at HUD? They looked me dead in the eye and said, "HUD is being run as a criminal enterprise." Now, that was the year in which $59 billion went, there were undocumentable adjustments at HUD of $59 billion. And the auditors gave up and refused to go and try and figure out where it was. The next year, for the next cycle, that appropriation committee and that senator, allocated an increase in appropriations to the agency, despite the fact that they refused to say where the undocumented, to account for the undocumentable adjustments or produce audited financial statements as required by law. So Congress continues to appropriate in the face of this. Now, the history of that cartoon is in 2001, on September 10th, Donald Rumsfeld stood up and said there's $2.2 trillion missing from DOD, and our problems with our financial problems are more serious than any terrorist problem that we have. And of course, the next day was 9/11, and DOD proceeded to get an enormous increase in appropriations. And it was claimed that the Office of Naval Intelligence that was investigating what was then $3.3 trillion missing from DOD was the office that was destroyed in the explosion in the Pentagon, resulting. Official story is a plane hit the Pentagon. So we have constant excuses as to why we can't produce audited financial statements, which are, become more and more absurd. The Department of Defense one on 9/11 being the ridiculous one. And so that is the history of why we put up the cartoon, because one of the excuses given on an informal basis, not a formal basis, is, it's all going down the black budget, and we need to use all this money to deal with these, very serious issues and very expensive technology. And the question one of the reasons I keep raising this question again and again is we literally see the government losing control of the most valuable technology in the world to private corporations, because all of this has to be kept secret behind what's called the black budget.
So do you see all of this as a corruption operation then, rather than just usual government incompetence?
You know something, Andy, in my experience, government's not incompetent at all. Some of the most competent people I've ever worked with are the U.S. civil service. You have extraordinary talent and extraordinary capability. And one of the things if you've ever worked in government, is that when the powers that be decide they want government to do something, lickety-split, the speed at which they can move and the efficiency and competency with which they can move are extraordinary. In my experience, oftentimes, I'll give you an example. Incompetence was a plan. So when I was Assistant Secretary of Housing, you would see programs, for example, multifamily mortgage insurance, where the government was offering insurance for way below the market price. So, of course, there was much more demand for the insurance than there was supply, because remember, the market clears when price equates supply and demand. If the price is lower than the market price, you're going to get more demand. So the question was, how can you, if you have $5 billion of insurance and there's $25 billion of demand, how can you allocate it? Well, one way you can allocate it is you can say, well, we have clear policy guidelines, so everything that's in Texas and has pink polka dots can have it. And if there's any left over, then things in Kentucky that have red stripes can have it. And you write up very clear guidelines, and that allocates the insurance. What we did is we gave very unclear guidance. Everything poured in, all 25 billion would pour in and get caught in what was called gridlock. And then the right lawyers would get the right wings and the 5 billion would magically get through. Whereas instead of saying to the 20 billion that didn't get through, oh, you're not part of the clear criteria, as a policy matter, we're not going to give it to you. You could say, oh, well, those stupid bureaucrats at HUD, they can never do anything right. Meantime, your friends, who are the ones who give you the most political contributions, they get through the system. So gridlock is a cover story. Incompetence is a cover story. There is a plan. You just can't see what it is. So I would say that generally government is not incompetent, except where that is considered to be desirable. It can be very slow moving, but that's because when you are managing scarce resources in a political environment, you have to be very careful and slow moving. So I think, as I said in the commentary below the cartoon, I think incompetence and corruption are really cover stories, because if you look at the extent to which we have shifted resources through the black budget, or out of pension funds or other large pots of money particularly since the 1990s. So in the black budget since 47. And then this huge shift of money, which I call the financial coup d'etat since 1990. These were all clearly very centralized policy dictates. They were orchestrated with an extraordinary coordination between the central banks and the sovereign government treasuries. This took policy at the G7 and the BIS and the IMF level. So this is policy coming very top down.
Well, it's great that we have people like you who can monitor this kind of thing with your experience of both banking and government. Now, moving on to currency control itself, the Fed has continuously decreased the value of the dollar from 1913. So I think now it's about 5% of its original value on some kind of measurements. Now, this devaluation is probably going to keep going under Janet Yellen. How do you think people can best protect themselves from this constant devaluation? Do you think gold is the best way to go? Or should people just stick to 401ks investing in stocks?
Well, I think we're in an environment where you absolutely have to be broadly diversified, not just by asset category, but by place. And there is no doubt in my mind, the single best way to protect yourself against this kind of debasement is to constantly be building skills and intellectual capital that can continually move you to the part of the curve which is, in the marketplace generating more. So whether you're investing in the stocks of the companies who are doing that, or you're doing that personally or in your own business, you want to have a portion of your time and money invested in keeping ahead of, because we're going through a period of an extraordinary explosion in new technology and the application of new technology. And, it's in that place. And again, it's either in your education or your own business or own skills or what you're investing in terms of equity. I do think it pays tremendously any time you can invest in something that permanently reduces your overhead, and increases your resilience, do it. So I come from an old Quaker family, and one of the things the Quakers do is every time you turn around, they're finding a way to cut spending. And do more for yourself. So I think keeping a very low overhead in this environment is important. I do think there is absolutely a role for precious, although because precious metals is right in the middle of the sort of control issues, you see enormous volatility. So I think with precious metals, I put up a blog post late last year called "How much precious metals should I hold in my what percentage of my portfolio should be precious metals?" And it's very important, I think, to divide your precious metals between what I call a core holding and an investment holding, and be prepared to be pretty rock and roll in your investment holding. And in your core holding, just say, look, these are core assets, just like land or a place to live in that gives me delight and is low overhead. These are assets we hold for a strategic reason, not to, generate income this year on our portfolio. So I definitely think you want precious metals as part of your core holdings, but you want to be careful because they're going to, they're in the middle of the greatest economic war going on.
Now, at the top of the show, just to finish off, we mentioned the Popsicle Quality of Life Index. Can you tell us why you invented this, and how do you think it might relate to other indexes like, say, the Dow Jones Index?
The Popsicle Index, Andy, is the percent of people in a place who believe a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle or ice cream stick or other snack, and then come home alone safely. When I was a little girl growing up in West Philadelphia, the Popsicle Index was 100%. It was unthinkable you weren't safe to run up to Spruce Street and get an ice cream and play the pins and come back at any time during the day and be safe. Now, the Popsicle Index has generally fallen, even though the Dow Jones or the S&P index have gone up, up, up. So we see the stock market indices going up, 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 but in many places, the Popsicle Index going down. Part of the idea of the Popsicle Index is I wanted something that was not measured by academics, not measured by what someone would call an objective system. I wanted something that could express how people feel. So if you're a 10-year-old child, your Popsicle Index is whatever you feel it is. And because I find over the long run, people's feelings about these things are very important feedback loops. So the idea was to get an expression of safety. And I have found over long periods of time, when I left serving in the first Bush administration, I started a company called Hamilton Securities Group, and we built databases that would allow us to look at all of the real estate financing and a lot of the financial transactions in communities and compare it to what was happening in the equity markets. And what you saw over long periods of time was the safer people feel, the higher the Popsicle Index, the more the equity valuations of the business and real estate place in that place was. And it was funny. I was working on community venture funds in the 90s. And my theory was, let's go into a place where the Popsicle Index is low, buy a lot of real estate cheap, get the Popsicle Index to go up, and make a whole lot of money on the real estate. But you could do it with community venture funds or community REITs as well. So think of it this way. The Dow Jones Index has been going up, up, up in America. The Popsicle Index has been going down. The question is, can we reverse the engineering of that so the Popsicle Index and the Dow Jones can help each other go up a lot more together? And I will tell you, if you look at the numbers, the answer is yes. If you said to me, how much is the equity valuation of every county in America compared to what it would be or could be, I would say it's about 1% of what it could be. I think the equity possibilities are so enormous that unless you sat down and done the numbers the way we did with relational databases, you just can't fathom it. And it is because, in fact, the negative return on government investment is so enormous. We have a lot of corporations propped up by government spending, which is not productive and not economic. And I can give you lots of examples. But if we could reverse engineer that in a way that the Popsicle Index and the Dow Jones went up together, we could build a significantly wealthier economy.
Well, I wish you great luck in making those two things positively correlated. It's been great speaking to you today, Catherine, as ever. How can our listeners find out more about your services?
You just come on into Solari.com, SOLARI. We have the Solari Report. It's a subscription-only service with a blog and some materials free. Come and check out the cartoon. I think it's one of the funniest cartoons I've ever seen. So check it out.
I love the UFO drawing above the government building. Anyway, thank you very much for your time today, Catherine Austin Fitts.
Thanks, Andy. You too. Have a great day.
You can subscribe to Sound Money on iTunes or sign up to our subscription service at soundmoneyshow.com, where you can also listen to our growing catalogue of podcasts, which include interviews with Doug Casey, Rick Rule, Jim Rogers and Peter Schiff. A special thank you today to Catherine Austin Fitts of the Solari Report for joining us on the show, and thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.